Welcome to Fish University, your one-stop shop for the science behind fish management. It is part of the Natural Resources University Podcast Network. I'm Wes Neal, your host. I'm an extension professor of fisheries and a researcher for Mississippi State University. Join me as I talk to researchers, managers, and landowners about the tools and science and the tricks of the trade for managing fish, water, and habitat. The goal is for you to have better fishing and a healthier aquatic ecosystem. So grab a notebook and the beverage of your choice and relax and enjoy Fish University. Welcome everyone, and thanks for tuning in to Fish University. We have spent several episodes talking about trophy bass and how to grow them, but today we're going to focus on something a little different. We're going to focus on the other end of the predator-prey spectrum, and that's growing big bluegill. Now, I'm not talking about pan fryers here. I'm talking about massive bulldog brim, fish that can really test your tackle. And joining me is someone who does this just about as good as anyone. My guest today is Sarah, the closer, Parvin. And if you subscribe to any traditional outdoor magazines or video channels or social media, you've probably encountered Sarah talking about her and her father's project, the Slab Lab. Now, the Slab Lab is an experiment in progress. It is a project where they're trying to grow the biggest bluegill possible. And I had a chance to visit with Sarah at the Slab Lab a few weeks ago. While I was unlucky and didn't catch the biggest fish, they didn't cooperate. I probably caught 20 of my personal best bluegill in about 4 hours. Welcome, Sarah. How are you doing this morning?
I am so good. Thank you so much for having me and taking the time to help us share this story and for coming fishing with me.
I never say no to going fishing with somebody. So you told me when I was there, you talked about how this passion for fishing in general and big bluegill specifically came about. But I'd love for you to sort of tell the listeners the story of how you developed into this angler that loves giant bluegill.
Well, the bluegill came a little bit later in life, but my dad and I have fished together for just about as long as I can remember. And my dad and my grandfather fished together. So it's just something that was sort of inherently in my family, was to be outdoors. And, you know, way back when you would go fishing, you went and you fished for supper. Whatever you caught, you ate. And that was years ago before catch and release regulations or things like that. So it was a full experience to go out early in the morning before the sun was up, work all day to find your supper, catch it, bring it back, clean it. My grandmother would cook it. And of course, cornmeal and hot grease. And that included bass. We ate the bass we caught too. She made the best homemade hush puppies you'd ever have. But it was just seeing that entire process gave you just such a great respect for not only the outdoors, but the time with family members and things like that. So that's how it sort of started for me. And
you told me that your dad used to punish you by taking you fishing.
He did. So I was quite the unruly teenager. I'm still very mischievous by nature, but I would get in trouble and he would punish me by, instead of allowing me to go spend the weekends with friends or keeping the roads hot, we would actually get on our little John boat that we had out at the Slab Lab, and I would have to fish with him for 8 hours straight. He wouldn't let me off the boat to use the bathroom because we would be catching fish, and that was the rule. And so I let him believe for about 2.5 years that I was miserable out on that boat, when the truth is, the reality is, I was having the time of my life. So it never felt like punishment for me.
So the pond is actually rather old, but the Slab Lab concept's pretty new. So give us the history on the pond.
So the pond is about 28 years old now, and it originated as a trophy bass lake. It was built with that intent to grow trophy bass, and we did. When we had the most recent fish kill, which was June 2018, we had 13 and 14 pound bass that we lost, including everything else in the pond, with the exception of coppernose fry. And these coppernose fry not only survived that fish kill, which was a low oxygen event, and they absolutely thrived. Something happened with those fry where their adaptability, their survival, just something changed with them. And so a lot of the fish that you see today are survivors of that very big fish kill event that we had in June 2018.
So you're thinking that bottleneck was a genetic bottleneck that somehow you selected for fish that grow larger?
That's the only thing that we can really piece together with this, because there are genetics that are at play here with how these fish can grow so rapidly. Obviously, we pellet feed out here, but there's something else that is happening that we're still trying to piece together in real time. So these fish are very special. They are not your average. We like to say they're not your granddaddy's bream. These are trophy fish at every level, and they are incredible sport fish.
So the pond, before the fish kill occurred in 2018, were you pellet feeding then?
We were. And, you know, as things develop, as technology progresses, back then we had a very limited type of feed that we were able to feed. We used to use the catfish feed, which is kind of a floating feed. It's not very high in protein. It's a little bit more low quality ingredients. So you didn't really see the growth in the bluegill back then. And that's one of the reasons why we think they never exceeded the 1 pound mark prior to 2018.
Gotcha. And then so when you discovered that the fish were growing and something weird was going on, that's when you switched to the higher protein. So the catfish feed was probably 28% protein, and now you're feeding what, 40, 41%?
40 to 42%.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening to Fish University. Do you have a question or a topic for the podcast? If so, you can email me at wes, that's W-E-S, .neal, that's N-E-A-L, at Mississippi State, that's MSSTATE.edu. Or instead, please visit the Fish University Facebook page. On the Facebook page, you will find useful articles, videos, stories, and other information, as well as updates on upcoming podcasts. Not to mention, you can send me a private message with questions or suggestions. Just search Fish University and look for our colorful logo. And please follow the Fish University page. We need your support. Now back to the show.
So Sarah, you told me when I was fishing with you that one day after the fish kill, you went back out, you restocked the pond, obviously, right after the fish kill with bass.
With bass, tiger bass, correct.
With tiger bass. And you told me that you went out there and you caught a very large bluegill, and you took it back and showed it to your father and said, you know, I caught a really big bluegill. And then you went back and you caught more and you realized, hey, this wasn't a one-off.
Right.
Something's going on here. At that point in time, you realize you had something special in the process. But obviously, you've done a lot to encourage that.
Yes.
So can you take us through some information about the pond first, you know, in terms of its size, water quality, watershed characteristics, anything that you can provide, and talk about what you do to help promote trophy bream?
Yes. So I did realize about 18 months after the fish kill, I started catching those coppernose, and I realized that not only did they have shoulders and what Dad and I call the brisket, which is where that chest extends almost past the helmet in the males, we call it the brisket. And when I started realizing that these fish were this size in numbers, a light bulb went off, and I knew that we had something special. And keep in mind, when we restocked the tiger bass after the 2018 fish kill, it was our intention to start over on a trophy bass program. So we were already, you know, a year and a half deep into that program and having to pivot. The lake is 5.2 acres. The deepest part is about 9 foot. The average depth is about 6 feet. There is tons and tons of structure, everything from the fish habitats that are man-made to rock piles. There's 100 tons of riprap. There's old trees and everything you can think of in there, with berms built up with pea gravel on top for bedding spots for the bluegill. So it was a labor of love when Dad designed this pond. And his thinking was, from every point, from every bank, you should be able to cast and catch a fish. And that's what you can do out there. So when we realized we had these amazing coppernose, we made a pivot. We decided we're going to pursue a trophy coppernose program, which meant we had to sort of think quickly on our feet because we had stopped in tiger bass that we were growing. And in a 5-acre lake, you cannot have a trophy bass and a trophy bluegill program. If you can, if someone has done that, please tell me how. But for all, things considered, you basically have to make a choice. And making that choice meant the pond management strategy was going to change and the feeding program was going to change. And so what we did was we kept our lake bass crowded, and then we decided to cull out a certain size of bluegill a couple of times a year. And that has helped us continue to push forward in growing the biggest coppernose people have ever seen.
You said something very interesting that I hope our listeners paid attention to, and that is you can't have everything from a single pond.
No.
And, one of the things I tell people when I do pond workshops and educational outreach is you have to set an objective. And that's exactly what you did. You changed your objective midstream because you found that things were going in a different direction. But you need to have a single objective and manage towards that objective. And you just can't have the best of both worlds in almost any service. Almost any time that doesn't work.
Right.
So you've set an objective, and that objective was reasonable. It was achievable within the management that you decided to do. And you knew right off the bat, look, we're not going to grow double-digit bass anymore.
Right.
Not if we want to focus on trophy bream. Question on the feeding program. So you have, I think it was 4 feeders or 5 feeders?
We have 4 feeders.
4 feeders around a 5-acre lake, so a little less than 1 per acre. And how much do you feed?
It varies depending on the time of the year and the water temps. Right now, our water temps are about 74 degrees, so we're in spawn here in Alabama. And as those water temps warm, we increase our feedings. So we're still only doing 1 feeding a day right now at dusk. We've not switched over to our daytime feedings just yet, but here in the next couple of weeks, all of those feeders go off 3 to 4 times during the day. And then the major feeding, the big feeding, is at nighttime. So those daytime feedings are a little bit shorter spins. And it just depends on how active those bluegills get. If it's a cloudy, overcast day, we know a 10-12-second spin of feed going out is going to be eaten, and there's not going to be excess feed left in the water, which is critical. When you manage and you operate at the level we do, you have no room for error with water quality and feeding. You have to get this within a teeny tiny time frame of these fish eating, because we feed so heavy. Water quality is one of the things we have to monitor every single day. So as the water temps warm, the ambient air temps warm, these fish wake up from their winter sleepy time blues. That is when we really put the feed to them. We do feed year round. This past year was a one-off for us because North Alabama received some of the coldest air it's received in almost 3 decades. So there was 2 weeks out of this year we could not feed because our water temps went 49, 50 degrees, which is not common in North Alabama. We always stay at about 55, which means we can feed year round. So once those water temps dipped there, we had to pull back for 2 weeks and we couldn't put a drop of feed in the water.
Gotcha. And this is a floating feed?
It is, yes. It's a floating feed. We use both Optimal Fish Feed and Aquamax MVP by Purina. It just depends on whichever one we can get. Sometimes our local supplier does not have one or the other in stock, and we kind of have to pivot back and forth. But both of those feeds are high quality protein, high fat, and do very well. They also are low phosphorus, which is something that we keep an eye on, trying to protect our water quality.
And you do something pretty interesting too. You actually circulate the feed around the pond using paddle wheels, right?
That's correct. We have 2 paddle wheels out at the Slab Lab, and each paddle wheel is made to create current or surface aeration for a 10-acre pond. So we have 20 acres essentially of aeration we can put into a 5-acre lake. and they create current quickly, and they push that feed from bank to bank. Okay, so that enables every fish out there to get a chance to eat. What it also does, and this is sort of where the experimental part of our pond comes into play, is we think this current contributes to the body dynamic of these bluegills. You think about an athlete that eats high protein, nutritious diet, and then exercises or, lifts weights, to build muscle. It's the same sort of theory when you've got these fish constantly in that current. They're fighting against that current, trying to eat. It changes the shape of their body for the best. We like to see the fish very tall and wide. So we think there's something to that as well.
So you're putting out a floating feed, high protein feed, you're spreading around the pond. During the peak feeding period, let's say, I don't know if that's midsummer for you, how many pounds of feed are you putting out a day?
I knew you were going to ask me this question. And I'll be honest with you, I want to be completely transparent here, and I'm going to. I do. So let me put my disclaimer out there. For most traditional pond management, I do not recommend this, okay? Let me say it very clearly. But we have American Sportfish that helps us manage our water clarity and take over pond management for us. At the height of feeding season, it is not unusual for us to put 150 pounds of feed in the water every day.
Okay, Sarah, so you mentioned, you're putting out a lot of food. You talked about water quality and how food can affect water quality. What are you doing to prevent the next fish kill?
Well, we've added some destratifiers across the bottom of the pond. We also have the paddle wheels in place. If we ever got to a point where we were feeling like a low oxygen event was getting ready to happen, cutting on those paddle wheels is such a dual purpose for us. Aside from just using them to feed, we would be able to keep oxygen in the water until we could mitigate whatever was causing the low oxygen event. So we feel like we're pretty protected as far as that goes. The prior fish kill in 2018 occurred because we had treated an algae bloom and the paddle wheels had went down. We were not able to turn them on to provide oxygen in the water. So that is why that fish kill occurred. But of course, now we keep everything running in pristine condition. The paddle wheels get serviced annually. Because you have to change out the gears on those and have the oil changed on them. Like you do a whole bunch of maintenance to them to protect them because they are our safety net should something ever happen.
And the destratification system, did you have that in place when you had the fish kill?
No, sir, we did not. That was added after. And we have 6 of those in our 5-acre lake.
6 of the diffusers out there, and do you turn those on? Are those running full time all the time?
Well, they are. We cut them off this winter, and we plan to cut them back on, and that's sort of a process in itself because you cut them on for a couple of hours, cut them off, cut them back on until you can just leave them running for 24 hours. So we're about at that time of year where everything starts to get really up and running out at the Slab Lab.
So in the midsummer, when water temperatures in the 80 plus degree range and you're feeding at the excessive rate that you feed in the peak of this feeding period, you've got 6 aerators and potentially paddle wheels going on a daily basis to help protect the pond. So not likely to have a fish kill.
Right. And we also have an underground well that pumps out 55 degree water. So if the water temps get excessively warm, we'll pump that in and cool that water down very slowly. So there's a couple of things in play now that we didn't have prior because we learned from our mistakes, which is very important in pond management.
Do you aerate the well water when it comes out?
No, we do not. It's a very slow, it's the way that it comes out in there. And I don't know the gallons per minute, whatever that is, but it is extremely slow.
Because well water comes out of the ground completely anoxic. So you told me when I was there that you recently had American Sportfish up to electrofish.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't told people how big your bluegill are yet.
They're pretty big. We electrofish with the objective being to selectively harvest. You cannot stretch your water capacity without having consequences. And so the bigger your fish get, the more fish you have to take out, right? You have to allow room for these fish to continue to grow. You have to reduce competition for forage. You basically have to reduce biomass to create an environment that can hold trophy fish. And so we are electroshocking 3 to 4 times a year right now. This past February, I believe it was, we had American Sportfish come out to do a selective harvest with us, and we pulled out, I think it was about 500 pounds of bluegill. And what was so unusual to us was we shocked up a ton of bass. They were very shallow. The bluegill had retreated a little bit deeper because we had had a cold front that had come through, and they were holding tight to the bottom. And so we didn't shock up any giant bluegill. The objective was to remove out fish that were 9 inches or under. So that is what we were targeting, and we pulled out all of those fish. Every fish is hand-picked by me, whether it goes or it stays. So I sit on the boat. I'm at the front of the boat with the dip net. We go through them. There's a whole process of measuring, weighing, deciding which one goes to the portable live well, which one gets to go back into the pond. It's a painstaking process, but it is one of the most fun things that we can do in pond management to me.
Of course, a 9-inch bluegill from your pond is not a small fish.
No,
right?
It's not.
It's a small fish by comparison, but what does a 9-inch fish weigh in your pond? Half a pound?
Oh, no, they're about a pound.
Oh, so up to about a pound already.
About a pound. And when you're looking at harvesting out those particular fish, we want to pay close attention to the non-parental males. A non-parental male that is 9 inches and hitting that pound mark has true trophy potential. That would be a fish that would go back. A female that may also be in a similar weight class or size class, she would get to go back with American Sportfish and not be released back to the Slab Lab.
So you're taking out fish that are a pound because they're coal fish.
Yes.
What are you putting back?
Anything that is over that 9-inch mark, any fish that is, to the untrained eye, trying to age a fish is a little bit difficult. There isn't exact science for being able to do that, but sometimes you can look at the size of the eyes and things of that nature and just make an assessment on the overall condition or health of the fish. If we see one that is fairly young or looks like it's going to continue to absolutely just grow from every angle, every side, that fish would go back into the Slab Lab.
And so when I was there, we're not able to catch the really big fish, but still we were catching fish that were, I had several that were just under 11 inches.
Right.
Still catching fish that are a pound and a half, maybe 1 or 2 that might have pushed pound and 3/4. But the fish you have in there get a lot bigger. What is the largest bluegill to date you've had come out of the lake?
We have shocked up several that were over the 32-ounce mark. And recently had someone that came and fished with me who caught one that was 41.1 ounces.
So you still haven't hit 3 pounds quite yet.
It's there.
It's there, but you haven't caught it yet.
Zip. But I do want to talk about that 41.1 ounce fish for just a second, if I can. That was a non-parental male. And that fish, 41.1 ounces, 12 inches long, 13 inches tall. I mean, that even took my breath away to see that. And I am sort of desensitized with the size of my fish because I see them every day. I catch them. We electroshock them up. But that is a fish that very possibly by as early September could be at that 3-pound mark. That is quite impressive. So it was also a very young fish.
Really? And how do you tell? You said it's hard to tell whether it's a parental male or not, but this one was obviously hadn't quite yet gotten ready to spawn.
I'll go ahead and tell you, it was Dr. Bruce Condello that caught that fish, who is, sort of has this name of the bluegill godfather. Everyone who loves big bluegill is very familiar with who he is. And he came out to fish with me, and I learned so much with him. But he said, this is the fish to watch. This is the fish to watch.
And what did he think of the Slab Lab?
He said it was the best day of fishing he's ever had.
So, Sarah, I have to ask, is your goal to grow the next world record bluegill?
We started out with that goal in mind, and it's so hard because you have so much exposure now because of social media, right? And when you have a background in marketing, like I do. You look for the right opportunities to sort of put a story out there to push your message forward, and to grow a world record size is the goal. The world record would not count the Slab Lab. However, the fish that are selectively harvested out and that leave with American sport fish that go get stocked in private waters or public lakes, those fish have the genetics to produce a world record anywhere else in the Southeast. So no, our goal is not to grow a titled world record coppernose, but our goal is to grow one that is world record size.
And the world record did come from relatively close by. How big is it?
It's 4 pounds, 12 ounces. So and there is no distinction. Coppernose is a subspecies of bluegill. So for the world record standard, they just say bluegill. So I've seen a replica mount of the 4 pound, 12 ounce fish that was caught out of Lake Ketona in 1950, which is south of me here in Alabama, out of an old lime quarry. Exceptional fish. I don't believe that it was a coppernose. It was some other form of bluegill, but it was not a coppernose.
For those listeners who don't know the difference between a bluegill and a coppernose, a lot of folks think it's a hybrid or something strange, some genetic
mutant
creation. It's not. It is just like a Florida largemouth bass. It's a Florida bluegill, essentially. Mm-hmm. It is a subspecies of the same species. It's distinguished by this really unique looking, how would you call that, across the nape of the fish?
We call it just a band. They have a band where the helmet on a male starts to form. There's a copper colored band, but I have seen that copper colored band be cream. I've seen it be very, very dark, almost black, and I've now seen it be brilliant turquoise blue.
I saw a picture you posted the other day of some of the most beautiful colors I think I've ever seen on a bluegill.
Yeah, absolutely. They're in spawn color. They're showing out.
The iridescent and metallic colors. I think I need to paint something like that sometime in the near future. One thing I think people want to know is, how do I fish this pond? Well, this is a privately owned lake. This is not someplace you can go fish. This is not something that you can charter a trip to do. However, you do have certain outreach events. You do certain programs at the pond. And you obviously have special guests come in and fish it. Tell us a little bit about some of the stuff you use the pond for.
So we do eventually want to open it up for limited number of guides. And the reason we want to sort of limit the number is to just protect the fish. It has taken a ungodly amount of money and time that we have invested into this. And when I say time, I mean blood, sweat, and tears. I'm out there every single day. My father, who is 71 years old, is out at that pond every single day. There is always something to be done. And we just want to protect the fish. If I was to open it wide up and just book out as many guide trips as I could, it'd be devastating to those fish, because not every fish can be handled correctly. Things will happen the more people that you have out there. So we have to keep it, somewhat small and exclusive to a certain degree. But my heart wants to share the joy of these fish with everyone. So it's sort of a tough road for me, because I really want people to get the experience of these coppernose bluegill and to have the same appreciation for this underrated fish that I have. So we do have a couple of outreach things that we do out here. Most recently, we've had the Mayfly Project, which is an international organization that just started a local chapter here in North Alabama. And what they do is they take foster kids and they teach them fly fishing from start to finish. And they normally start in January, and the program goes all the way to May. And they teach these kids everything from tying flies to how to fly fish to conservation, how to be a good steward of the outdoors. So for this year's event, they got to come to the Slab Lab, and it was 6 children, 6 fly rods. And I thought, oh my goodness, what could go wrong? This is going to be fantastic. And I was absolutely blown away. Not only did these children have a deep appreciation for the outdoors, this program taught them how to handle fish. It taught them how to do everything that I would have asked anyone else out there to do or be mindful of when fishing for these fish. And each child caught about 20 plus bluegill. And I mean, it was just a spectacular time.
Of course, now they're all spoiled. They'll
Yes,
never
they
be able
are.
to catch another fish like that in the rest of their lives. So,
They are, but that's why it was so important for me to sort of share with them why these fish are important and why they're special. And of course, we let them know the bluegill that you may fly fish for in a creek are not going to be exactly the same as these. This is a very special treat. But what better way to get the youth excited about fishing and about learning than actually put them on fish? You know,
absolutely.
you take me out somewhere for 2 hours and I'm not catching anything, I'm checked out. But you take me somewhere and put me on fish, I'm immediately, enthralled in what's going on and what's happening, and I want more of it. So it's been a great place for teaching as well.
Now, I want to circle back real quick we were talking about American sport fish and the harvest that you do. You said you took out about 500 pounds of fish this spring. What is your annual goal, at least your goal this year for harvest?
We will probably pull out, for 2023, we will probably pull out an additional 1,500 pounds.
So right now you're looking at harvesting about a little less than 400 pounds per acre.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about this with bass. I always tell people that a pond can support a carrying capacity, whatever that carrying capacity is. You're manipulating carrying capacity by feeding, and the pond's really fertile, and that fertility helps everything. But still, there is a carrying capacity. And the way I like to think about it, let's say the pond can support 1,000 pounds of bluegill per acre, which is probably a bit high, but maybe it can. Who knows? So if it can support 1,000 pounds of bluegill per acre, you could have 1,000 1-pound bluegill, or you could have 500 2-pound bluegill. Heck, maybe you can have 250 4-pound bluegill. I don't know, but that would be nice. But it's only going to support the carrying capacity. So what she's doing essentially is by taking out 400 pounds or 400 bluegill essentially per acre, is she's freeing up those resources for the fish that remain, and those fish therefore can use that energy that's no longer being taken up by those 400 fish, and they can essentially convert it into their own bodies.
Right. That's exactly right.
That's the goal there. And it's something that's hard. It's very hard as an angler or a pond manager to kill fish.
Yes.
I mean, we love our fish. We put a lot of money and effort into our fish. I know that it's just very difficult to take a fish out and think, if I take this fish out now, it never will have a chance to get big. But you can't think like that. You have to think, if I take this fish out, another fish has a chance to get big. How do you deal with that?
Very easily. The fish that I pull out don't get killed. They get transported in a mega live well back to Auburn or back to Montgomery, Alabama through American Sport Fish, and then they are distributed to public lakes or other private pond owners. Because what they're getting essentially is the top athlete. You're getting a 9-inch fish that is highly feed trained and has potential to go somewhere. But our pond, our baseline metric is so much higher now because we're going into year 5 of the Slab Lab that fish no longer meets our standard. But to someone else, that is a very high standard and high quality of fish that they're going to get.
And keep in mind that she just said that this is year 5 of the Slab Lab. So she's growing these fish. These fish are likely not any older than 5 years old.
Correct.
Yet you're already reaching 2.5 pounds with 3-pounders likely out there.
Correct.
So the potential is there for something really large.
Yes. And you've got a short window to really make this happen. So we believe the first 90 days of life on these bluegill is where you can put the most growth on them as their size is. So as they're fry, you can put as much growth on them as you're ever going to get in that first 90 days. So it's like a constant cycle out there of us trying to reach this objective, which makes it so much fun. There's always something different happening, and these bluegill will spawn all the way through September here in North Alabama.
And that's a great point, because it's very difficult to take a pond that is bass crowded or bluegill crowded and convert it away from that fact, because, in a bass crowded pond, you've got a bunch of small, let's say 12-inch bass swimming around. Sure, you could take out 80% of those fish and you can increase prey production, and those fish are going to grow. But a lot of those fish are already 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. They're never going to have the trophy potential that a young fish going into the perfect situation is going to have. And that's what you're saying, is that first 90 days is critical. You get them growing in the right direction early, and then you free up resources through harvest. Whereas if somebody wants to do this in their own pond, they're not going to be able to take an existing pond and convert it into something that's this caliber of a fishery. The fish kill really was a blessing in disguise, wasn't it?
It was. It truly was. And that is the unspoken theme of the slab movement, is what do you do when you have just stared defeat in the face? And as any pond owner can imagine, you walk out one day and you see your investment belly and fin up, surface to surface, bank to bank, covered. I mean, it'll make you physically ill to see something like that, and to be able to come back and sort of rise from the ashes with a whole different program available to you with these coppernose bluegill. I mean, it's kind of like the underdog mentality. Take this little underrated kid's fish and make it where everybody is just salivating over the chance to not only catch them, but now wants to grow them. So it's a really cool story that Dad and I happen to be writing in real time. And man, it's just been such a blessing to be able to do this shoulder to shoulder with him. I can't tell you that is the biggest takeaway for me, is having this project to work alongside my dad with.
When you're given lemons, you make lemonade. In your case, I think you made lemon meringue pie or something.
We did.
You mentioned these cold fish are removed and taken to the hatchery system. So one of my episodes, we talked about the ShareLunker program out of Texas, the Toyota ShareLunker program. And essentially that's what you're doing, is you're taking fish with proven growth potential and you're using those as brood stock for future fish.
That's correct. The hatchery spawns them out down there. They have separate holding ponds. So that's exactly what we're doing. We don't call it ShareLunker, but it is almost a mirror image of what Toyota is doing in Texas.
If you can get Toyota to sponsor you, can call it the Share Slab.
Hey, I like a good Tundra now. Wink, wink. I could use a new car. Mine's about 12 years old.
Get you a Share Slab program. They'll give you a new Tundra with a hauling tank on it, and you can drive them yourself down.
I do want to bring this up because I'm an avid bass angler as well. I mean, pretty much if there's a fish in the water, I want to catch it. That's how much I love fishing. But what the Toyota ShareLunker program has done, everybody is just blown away by these fish that are coming out of OHIV, right? We're seeing multiple teen bass, multiples in a short time frame, which is just absolutely incredible. I try to explain to people the rarity of a double-digit bass. Social media kind of has us fooled a little bit because we see the biggest of the big fish all the time. But for a bass to reach double digits and in volume and numbers like that, it's just absolutely an incredible thing. That program started 3 decades ago. This is the fruits of that labor. You're seeing that now. So, pond management is one of those things that is an absolute investment into the future. And I just want everybody to understand that the work that goes into it, and, you're able to have these caliber fish because you do the work for them. So I love following everything the ShareLunker program is doing. Those bass, man, I got to get me one. I got to get me a teen bass. That would be my new PB if I could get a 13-pound bass. So
the funny thing about, you mentioned OHIV, is every one of those double-digit teen bass that are being caught out of there, the vast majority of them can be tracked back to individual ShareLunkers genetically from that program. So I think you should go with that. I think you should go for a Share Slab program. Or
Share Slab. I like it.
Sarah, I was recently reading Gamekeepers Magazine. You wrote an article in there about the Slab Lab. But what I found most interesting about it is on the next page, there's an advertisement for Texas Hunter products. You use Texas Hunter products around your pond. And what's interesting about it is in the image, there's 24 pictures of fish, every single one of them with you holding them.
Yes, all my trophies.
So what's your kickback from Texas Hunter product?
I actually don't get a kickback from Texas Hunter products. What I did is when I realized what the opportunity was that Dad and I had with these coppernose, I quickly rushed to collaborate with the resources we already had that we were using that helped us grow these fish. So I reached out to Texas Hunter and let them know, hey, your feeders are an integral part of how we're able to feed and consistently get feed to these fish, because nobody wants to stand out there in the cold weather or monsoon rains here in North Alabama and hand cast fish feed every hour on the hour or whatever your feeding schedule is. So by having those feeders there that are set to go off at different times of the day for different length spin, you can custom tailor your feeding program to your fish. And that is one of the biggest things that we have done. But I do not work for Texas Hunter. They do not pay me. It just is what it is. When we discovered the true potential of these coppernose, I'm the one that called American Sports Fish and said, you're going to think I'm crazier than a bed bug, but we've got something here, and these fish belong to you just as much as they do me because they came from your hatchery. And at first, it was so funny. Sean kind of was like, okay. And I said, look, when we hang up off this phone call, I'm going to send you some pictures, okay? And you do with them what you want, but I just want you to understand. So I texted him about 5 or 6 pictures. He immediately called me back, and he was like, I want to come see it. He made the 8-hour round trip, drove up to see us, and said, we're in. What do you need? Where do you need help? And so it was not necessarily me trying to get anything or influencer type stuff. It was, we've got something and we need to share it with you because it belongs to you too.
So they've been involved now with this project for how long?
So the original coppernose came from them. That is the hatchery where these coppernose came from. They really got involved about a year ago with us, a little over a year ago, about 13 months ago. And they came up and they did the very first electroshocking after the fish kill. So once the fish kill happened, we electroshocked 3 separate times to see if there was anything left in the water. There wasn't. We couldn't get anything up. There was nothing coming up in the water. So when we restocked in the bass, we kind of let time do its thing. And once we discovered we had these coppernose, it hadn't been shocked. So when they came up and they shocked, Sean was just like, this is absolutely incredible. He said, I've never seen anything like this. It's big bluegill everywhere. It just doesn't quite fit the mold, right? You can have a couple of trophy fish here and there, but to have more trophy fish than not trophy fish, there's something happening here. So, and every time he comes to shock or to treat the pond, he is always excited because he thinks it's like the Disney World of bluegill. So,
so you said the fish originally came from them. Are we talking 28 years ago?
yes.
So this is the original stocking from 28 years ago that was potentially bottlenecked in some way in 2018, but these are still from the original stocking.
The original stocking.
First, those fish probably came from the hatchery. They might have been from one or a few broodstock pairs.
Right.
And then they went through a bottleneck. I mean, you very well may have something that's genetically distinct going on. It's like, you mentioned some of these fish went to Auburn. Is Auburn doing genetic testing on them?
Yes, sir, they are.
When do you think you'll know about what they're going to find?
I don't know. I actually have it calendared for me to follow up with them and just kind of see, like, what have you found out? Speak to me in layman's terms, because I am not a PhD. Make it very clear if you couldn't already tell. But speak to me in layman's terms and tell me what is happening here. So hopefully we'll find some answers on that soon. But I do want to bring up an important point, because a lot of people ask me, do you use steroids on these fish? And the answer is absolutely no. Not in any capacity, not in any part of the program. There is nothing steroid about these fish. It's high protein fish feed, correct environment, culling process, habitat in place, all of those things with some genetics sprinkled on top. So, but there is no steroid use on these fish whatsoever.
Certainly. And for people listening, I mean, there are four things that go into growing big fish, and it's very similar to deer management, except for deer are warm-blooded animals, and they're not affected as much by growing season, but fish are. Fish are poikilothermic or cold-blooded animals. So growing season plays a role. Genetics plays a role. Age certainly plays a role, but the biggest thing has always been food. The way to a trophy fish is
through its stomach.
exactly right. People that ask you these crazy questions, no, you feed them. You make sure that they have unlimited food. And when a fish has unlimited food and limited competition, they're going to grow well.
They are.
Now, that being said, every pond probably doesn't have this kind of potential. I mean, there's something special about your pond. It's probably something to do with the watershed characteristics, the natural limestone in the area, a variety of things like that. But I mean, every single pond can't turn into a Slab Lab, but every single pond has potential to grow bigger brim than it has right now.
Right. And for me, I'm just sort of, stunned that more people haven't tried to do this, or if they have, I don't know about them doing it, because growing trophy bass that's always been sort of the primary focus in pond management. You do any Google search on trophy pond, it's bass, 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 bass. You don't see quite as much interest in the coppernose bluegill, and that's probably because the coppernose bluegill is really limited to being Tennessee line and south. They're not going to do well further north. They're not going to survive in these colder climates or places where you get hard water a couple months out of the year. They have to have these warmer climates in order to survive. They're native, from Florida. So, it's very parted territory kind of, which makes me excited. It's like, what can we do with this that hasn't been done yet? So.
Well, when I was up there, we caught crappie in your pond.
Yes.
And, I spent a lot of time talking about why crappie are bad, but somehow they don't appear to be affecting you very much. So how did the crappie get there, and what do you do to manage them?
So my dad is a retired radiation oncologist. He practiced medicine here in Huntsville for 30 plus years. And one of his very, very sweet patients went to Guntersville one day and caught a mess of crappie and thought he was doing us a favor and release them into the pond. And so they are so prolific, it is almost impossible to remove them once they're there without draining the pond and starting over. And so every crappie we catch comes out, every crappie we electroshock comes out. But so far, it doesn't seem like they are, inhibiting the growth of the bluegill. It just seems like something else is happening here. But crappie is not something we want in the Slab Lab.
Yeah, it helps that you're bypassing the food chain. So any impact that they would have would be through the natural production. They're certainly not feed trained.
No.
And the bluegill are. So I think you're bypassing the effect that the crappie have to some extent. And who knows, maybe when they do spawn, maybe crappie fry become bluegill prey too.
I think that, and you know what? I think maybe just like the tiger bass we have, maybe they sort of do a little bit of extra population control with the bluegill for us. Because you think a female bluegill can lay thousands and thousands and thousands of eggs every spawn, and we get 6 to 7 spawns a year out of our fish. That's a lot of fish. Even though a very small percentage survive, that's still a lot of fish. So maybe they help us a little bit. I don't know.
Maybe so. And I did catch one red ear when I was there, but you say the red ear, they're not feed trained. It didn't look anything like the bluegill do.
No, but I have caught a red ear. It was this past December or January that had a feed belly on it. I'm telling you, that wasn't a spawning fish. The water temps weren't right. The time of year wasn't right. That red ear had a belly on it, like a feedlot pig belly. And then there's a little lure that I'll use from time to time that I kind of made up that's pellet shaped. It's not the traditional pellet shaped lures that are on the market. This is one I kind of just haphazardly tied on one day, hoping to get a bite. And it produced several bites for me. And I have caught 5 red ear using that little bitty pellet feed. So I don't know.
They may be setting down below the schools of bluegill, picking up whatever falls.
That's kind of what I think. And I know they make like snail-shaped flies and things like that because red ear, are predominantly feeding on the bottom. And They just have a bit of a different characteristic than the coppernose bluegill. But how much fun would it be to grow some red ear? That would be a great endeavor.
They have potential to get larger than bluegill.
And what we have seen out at the Slab Lab is we have seen red ear and coppernose hybrid, which we call the gill cracker. We don't know if there's a scientific term for that. Those fish have potential to grow very large as well, but they are markedly different than the coppernose. And if you catch one out there, you would know instantly that's not a coppernose. They have a larger mouth. The black ear tab has white marbling around the edge of it. They have some different color variation and pattern formation around the mouth also. You just know that's a hybrid. That's not a true coppernose. So it's very fun.
Hopefully you don't get a lot of hybridization. But
we haven't seen much. We've only shocked up 2 gill cracker in 12 months, and I've caught 2. So I've seen 4 out of thousands of fish. So
Sarah, what's next for the Slab Lab?
Well, that's sort of a loaded question because we really are focused on the task at hand right now, which is growing a world record sized coppernose, which would mean that fish would have to be 5 pounds. That is a years long process to do that. So we're not going to take our eye off the ball there. When and if we reach that goal, I think Dad and I might try to do something with some red ear, but our intention would not be to do that out at the Slab Lab. We are wanting to dig a 100-acre lake here in Alabama and do some other experimental type things with fish. So it's a tough question for me to answer. Right now, we're just really focused on growing that 5-pound coppernose.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed speaking with you and learned a lot. And I think our listeners have learned a lot. If folks are interested in growing trophy brim, Sarah knows what she's talking about, and they're doing some really cool things. So, Sarah, thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me and letting me ramble on about my slabs.
Absolutely. And everyone, thank you for listening to Fish University. Please join us next time. Thanks.
Fish University is hosted by Wes Neal, an employee of Mississippi State University Extension Service and a faculty member in the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Aquaculture. This podcast is part of the Natural Resources University network of podcasts. Funding was provided by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. If you have questions or suggestions, please go to the Extension website at extension.mississippistate.edu. Click on Natural Resources and then select the Fisheries tab in the drop-down menu. Or you can email me at wes.neal@msstate.edu.